I think pretty much what I have is, it seemed like from what everybody spoke today, it's kind of like a summary of everything everybody said. So, I guess it's a good way to wrap it up. But so I was online about, I think it was like last Sunday, and I read that it was a Navy SEAL admiral. It's Admiral McRaven. He gave his graduation speech at the University of Texas, and then what he did is that he gave the students like a list of 10 things, 10 lessons that he learned when he went to school to be a Navy SEAL during his basic SEAL training, like about 20 years before. And he gave him 10 lessons that he learned that he hoped would be of value to them as they moved on, in terms of how they could change the world. And all these things have a direct spiritual correlation as well with us. Their SEAL training it's 6 months, but it seemed like they crammed all these lessons into 6 months, which is just representative of our entire life. So these are things that we encounter throughout our entire life as we continue on our walk with God and with Jesus. So just kind of a explanation of the SEAL training that he kind of gave. He said it's 6 months of long, torturous runs in the soft sand, midnight swims in the cold water off San Diego, obstacle courses, unending calisthenics, days without sleep, and always being cold, wet, and miserable. It's 6 months of being constantly harassed by professionally trained warriors who seek to find the weak of mind and body and eliminate them from ever becoming a Navy SEAL. That's what the devil does for us, right? He tries to find the weak, whether it's the people that don't believe, so he can do everything he can to keep them not believing, or he attacks us and those weak areas of our minds, our bodies, and our spirits to continue to keep us down and keep our spirits low. But the training also seeks to find those students who can lead in an environment of constant stress, chaos, failure, and hardships. And to him, it was a lifetime of challenges crammed into 6 months. So every morning, the instructors would come into their barracks room, and they would inspect their bed. And so it's a very exact process, same thing I went through when I went to military school as well. So the corners would be square, covers pulled tight, pillow centered just under the headboard, and an extra blanket folded neatly at the foot of the rack. And it said it was a simple task. But every morning they were required to make it to perfection. And the point of this is that if you make your bed every morning, you will have accomplished the first task of the day. It will give you a small sense of pride, and it will encourage you to do another task and another. If you can't do the little things right, you will never do the big things right. And if by chance you have a miserable day, you will come home to a bed that you made. So the first point is, if you want to change the world, start off by making your bed. And us making our bed is when we get up in the morning, it's giving God that few seconds of your time, if that's what it is, whether it's just reading a couple Bible verses, whether it's just having a talk with God, whether it's praying or whatever, because that sets you up for your day. Just like when you, like I said, at the job site, if you know you're going to have to frame today, you don't show up without your hammer. You don't show up without the tools that you need to do your job. When you go to a regular job where you sit behind a desk. Everybody goes to their job and they wear their uniform that's appropriate to do their job. When we give God that little time in the morning, we put that armor of God on, which is our spiritual uniform. Just like you don't leave out your door ill-equipped, ill-uniformed, we shouldn't do the same thing spiritually without putting our full armor of God on in the morning. And I know for me, I make promises all the time. Hey, God, I know you want me to do this. You want me to pray for this person. You want me to read here, do that. And your day gets so cramped and consumed with stuff. At least at the end of the day, if your plans got totally messed up and you never gave another second to God through that day, at least you can know in your mind that you gave that minute or 2 or 5 minutes, whatever that was in the morning. You don't have to feel so bad. So during the SEAL training, the students are broken down into boat crews of 7 students, and every day they had to paddle several miles down the coast. And in the winter, the surf off San Diego can be 8 to 10 feet high, and it's exceedingly difficult to paddle through the plunging surf unless everyone digs in. For the boat to make it to its destination, everyone must paddle. You can't change the world alone. You will need some help. So the second one is, if you want to change the world, find someone to help you paddle. We know that those 8 to 10 feet high waves Those are all those trials, those tribulations, those attacks from the devil that we have in our lives that are, difficult for us to get over. Not the 1 and 2 foot waves, they're no big deal. But as we continue on with our walk, there are always going to be those times where you're going through something, you're always going to need the help of somebody else. Whether it's just a quick 5-second word from that person that gives you something that reinvigorated your spirit or your faith and kept you moving on. In the same sense, too, we have to align ourselves with people in our lives that where if we do end up needing them at some point, we have that person we can go to. We're not aligning ourselves with people in our lives that would, cast doubt into your mind when you're going through something and tell you the opposite of what God would want you to do. And just as, I know Pastor Craig said yesterday, when your physical body has a body part that gets injured, the other body parts work together to help that body part. That's what we're supposed to do as well for each other. So the SEAL class started out with 150 men. It was down to 35. He was in a boat with the tall guys. But the best boat crew they had was made up of the little guys, and they called them the Munchkin crew. And no one was over about 5'5". So even though that they would always make fun of them, like good-natured fun, just kind of poking fun with them, they out-paddled, out-swam, and outran all the other boat crews. So nothing mattered but your will to succeed. Not your color, not your ethnic background, not your education or your social status. So number 3, if you want to change the world, measure a person by the size of their heart, not the size of their flippers. And I know that we could totally relate with, when you look at, and mention John the Baptist, he did not look normal. We talk about people who don't look normal. They don't look holy. They don't look a certain way that we have in our minds that people are supposed to look. You had David Goliath. This guy's little guy. People counting him out. You're too little. But it doesn't matter. So we have to just always keep in our minds that we don't judge people by their appearance. We talked about the fruits. If we do, I hate to use the word judge, but if we do examine people, we need to do it, examine them by their fruits, by their heart, and by their intentions. So several times a week, the instructors would line up the class and do uniform inspection. And it was very thorough. Your hat had to be perfectly starched, your uniform immaculately pressed, and your belt buckle shiny and void of any smudges. But it seemed that no matter how much effort you put into starching your hat or pressing your uniform or polishing your belt buckle, it wasn't good enough. The instructors would find something wrong. And for failing, the student had to run fully clothed in the surf zone and then wet from head to toe, roll around the beach until every part of your body was covered with sand, and they would call you a sugar cookie. And you stayed in that uniform for the rest of the day, cold, wet, and sandy. And there were many students who just couldn't accept the fact that all their effort was in vain, and that no matter how hard they tried to get the uniform right, it was unappreciated. Those students didn't make it to the training. Those students didn't understand the purpose of the drill. So sometimes, no matter how well you prepare or how well you perform, you still end up as a sugar cookie. So the 4th one is, if you want to change the world, get over being a sugar cookie and keep moving forward. So I know probably every person here has had times in their life where they, you set yourself up from when you were little or in your life. You're like, hey, I'm going to prepare myself. Like you guys say, I want to make it in a band. You did everything from a kid growing up. I'm going to just learn this instrument. I'm going to be the best. 24 hours a day, any free second, I'm going to study this instrument. I'm going to study this craft. And I'm going to be this. And then some way you're going towards that, and it doesn't happen. And you're totally kind of devastated for that moment. You're like, my whole life was working up to this moment, and it didn't happen. And you think that you failed. And however long you let that moment affect you, from that moment to however long it takes you to get over that, you're like this sugar cookie. You stay cold, and you stay wet and sandy. Yeah. And so we just have to realize that no matter how hard we try to do things at times, that God's always in control, and we would never be this sugar cookie if we had that mindset, because we would never have a failure. The fact that for me, I always wanted to be in the auto industry, and I had that opportunity. I was like, man, I went to business school, great. Everything I ever worked for was this moment. I'm at Nissan flew me over there for these interviews. I'm like, this is everything I ever wanted, and it didn't happen. And I was like, pretty disappointed, like anybody would be. But at that moment, I told God, I was like, look, at this moment, it was like my leap of faith moment. Obviously, you have a different will for me. I didn't fail. You take failure out. It's just a rerouting of a path. It's a rerouting of your mind and changing your mind. You think, I thought I was supposed to go here, but I wasn't, so I just keep going forward. And I just waited and was patient, and there was something much better for me that I couldn't even know. Wasn't even playing the drums at the time. Didn't know I was going to be in a band here. Didn't know anything. So for me to be off traveling across the world somewhere, or across the country, doing some job for the world, would have been so much less fulfilling than being here, fulfilling my walk and my purpose here, speaking and whatever God has for me to do here, than being over there. So every day during training, you were challenged with multiple physical events designed to test your mettle. Every event had standards, times you had to meet, and if you failed to meet those standards, your name was posted on the list, and at the end of the day, those on the list were invited to a circus. It was 2 hours of additional calisthenics designed to wear you down, to break your spirit, to force you to quit, and no one wanted a circus. Circus meant that for that day you didn't measure up. It meant more fatigue, and more fatigue meant that the following day would be more difficult, and more circuses were likely. But during SEAL training, everyone made the list at some point. But it was an interesting thing that happened to those who were constantly on the list. Over time, those students who did the 2 extra hours of calisthenics got stronger and stronger. The pain of the circuses built inner strength, and it built physical resiliency. Life is filled with circuses. You will fail. It will be painful. It will be discouraging. At times, it will test you to your very core. And number 5, if you want to change the world, don't be afraid of the circuses. And to me, this is like those times when, it's kind of like that cliche they say, when it rains, it pours. When you have like one thing go bad, I lost my significant other in this relationship. We're not together anymore. And then you lose your job, and then your car breaks down. It's like when you have those times you feel like everything just will not go your way, and it's not aligned the right way. It was kind of like Job, everything was going perfect for him. And then his kids get taken away, and his cattle, die. God just kind of allowed the devil to do those things to him. But we just have to use that as an example to know at the end that's when you have to just hang in there and know that God is still there with you. Amen. And then at the end, he came out with much more than he had before he started. Amen. So we have to remember those times, those examples, and just know that you're going to come out on top, and you're going to come out better than what you started. So at least twice a week, they had to run an obstacle course. It contained 25 obstacles, which included some obstacles. But the most challenging obstacle was the Slide for Life. It had a 3-level, 30-foot tower at one end and a 1-level tower at the other. And in between was a 200-foot long rope. You had to climb the 3-tier tower, and once at the top, you grabbed the rope, you swung underneath, and pulled yourself hand over hand until you got to the other end. And there was like a record that was set back in the 70s, and they always thought it was like unbeatable until one day a student decided to go down the Slide for Life head first. So instead of swinging his body underneath the rope and inching his way down, he bravely mounted the top of the rope and thrust himself forward. It was a dangerous move, seemingly foolish and fraught with risk, because if he fell and hurt himself, he could get injured, and you would have to get a drop from training. But without hesitation, the student slid down the rope perilously fast. Instead of several minutes, it only took him half that time, and by the end of the course, he had broken the record. So number 6, if you want to change the world, sometimes you have to slide down the obstacle head first. And it reminds me of the whole David and Goliath story, because Goliath was that record that seemed unbeatable, especially to all the Israelites. And instead of doing the status quo of, hey, I'm going to fight this guy, you always think, I'll put on my armor, and I'll get my sword, and I'll go to battle like how they did. But instead of going the same route that everybody would take, he did it a different way. He bravely mounted the top, and he thrust himself forward. It was a dangerous move. He didn't even wear any armor. He went with stones and a slingshot. So it seemed foolish. You can imagine what they thought about him when he walked in there and he had nothing on which the people thought that he should be wearing. So, and he was, he fraught with risk. People thought, hey man, especially to him, it was life or death. Somebody was going to die that day. It was going to be him or it was going to be Goliath. But without hesitation, he ran up to Goliath. It said he ran. He ran fast, and instead of taking several minutes, it took him one stone, it was over with. So it just shows you, when you put your mind towards something and you have your mind right, especially with something God has told you something that you will do or you will overcome. You've just got to claim that and know that, hold on to that, run swiftly and boldly to that challenge, because you already know that you've already claimed your victory.
Amen.
Do it God's way, and let him work out the rest. He didn't even have to fight.
Amen.
God already had it mapped out for him. Already had the whole thing already fixed for him. You just got to walk. So during the land warfare phase, the students were flown out to San Clemente Island, and the waters there are a breeding ground for great white sharks. And to pass SEAL training, there are a series of long swims that must be completed. One is a night swim. And the instructors, they assured them that, however, that no student has ever been eaten by a shark, at least not recently. But you're also taught that if a shark begins to circle your position, stand your ground. Don't swim away. Don't act afraid. And if the shark, hungry for a midnight snack, darts towards you, summon up all your strength and punch him in the snout, and he will turn and swim away. And there are a lot of sharks in this world. If you hope to complete the swim, you will have to deal with them. So number 7, if you want to change the world, don't back down from the sharks. So we know the shark's the devil, right? We talked about the devil being smart and all his people and things that he uses towards you. That's, he's a hungry shark, and he's got all these intelligent beings that know you better than you know yourself.
Teeth by the millions.
And, he used...
Teeth by the thousands.
Obviously, he uses people a lot. He uses people to try to discourage you, talk about you, put you down. All these types of horrible things. But like I said, you rebuke them, right? That's punching that shark in the snout. You keep your eyes focused on God and what He's told you to do, and you keep moving forward. I know we say that like it's so simple, like, oh, we'll just rebuke you. I don't care what you say. I'm just going to keep doing what God wants me to do. It's not always that simple, especially when it has to do with people that are close to you. It could be a husband or wife. It could be your family members. It could be a close friend or something like that. It's hard to just tell them no or whatever God tells you to tell that person. But it's even more critical at that point when they are close to you for you to really listen. Because a lot of times when we want to get involved and do things our way, we really mess things up in those type of relationships. Maybe that person's not saved or whatever, and they don't want to see things your way, and they're talking about you or something. You just got to continue to be focused on what God wants you to do and not break down and lash out and do these things that the devil is just waiting for you to do. Because God is working that relationship out. He's working that person. You don't even know it. You don't see it. He's already working that out. And one day, man, when it all turns around just like that, you're like, man, I'm glad I just stuck with what God told me to do, and I didn't try to put my hands on that. Because, man, if I had to punch that dude because I was pissed at him, or if I had said these words, man, the whole situation would have been just totally messed up. So as Navy SEALs, one of their jobs is to conduct underwater attacks against the enemy shipping. And they had a ship attack mission where the SEAL divers, they're dropped off outside an enemy harbor, and then they swim well over 2 miles underwater, using nothing but a depth gauge and a compass to get to their target. So during the entire swim, even well below the surface, there's some light that comes through. As you approach the ship, the light begins to fade. The steel structure of the ship blocks the moonlight, and it blocks all ambient light. To be successful in your mission, you have to swim under the ship and find the keel, the center line, and the deepest part of the ship, but it's also the darkest, where you can't see your hand in front of your face, where the noise from the ship's machinery is deafening, and where it's easy to get disoriented and fail. So at that moment, it's a time where you must be calm, composed, when all your tactical skills, your physical power, and all your inner strength must be brought to bear. So number 8, if you want to change the world, you must be your very best in the darkest moment. So I know we've all had those times where whatever that time was in your life where it was like you were at the lowest point of your life, where you felt like, I don't know if I can go on at this point. That's when you have to rely on everything that you've ever been taught, everything God has taught you, everything that you've ever learned, to keep your mind right so you can eventually move on from that situation. A lot of people don't. A lot of people just stay stuck in that situation and they spiral down into depression. That's how they get hooked on alcohol, drugs, all these millions of different things. But we have to keep the faith in those times, and talked about when you can't see the light. A lot of times when you're in those situations, you think that God's left you. I can't feel you, God. I don't understand what's going on, but he's never left you. He's still there. Those times are a test of our own faith. Sometimes we kind of get big-headed and think that, like, hey, I'm good with God. And then he smacks you like that. It's to test your own faith. Where are you really at? We'll all have those dark times, and we'll all be tested to this effect at some point, maybe more than once. But we just have to keep the faith and just rely on all of our prior training that we've received in our life to get through. So in the 9th week of training is referred to as Hell Week. 6 days of no sleep, constant physical and mental harassment, and one special day at the Mud Flats. It's a swampy patch of terrain where the mud will engulf you. So on that Wednesday evening, their training class, having committed some quote-unquote egregious infraction of the rules, they were ordered into the mud. The mud consumed each man until there was nothing visible but their heads. And the instructors told them they could leave the mud if only 5 men would quit. Just 5, and they could get out of the cold. Some students, looking around, it was apparent that some students were about to give up. It was well over 8 hours until the sun was going to come up. The chattering teeth and swivering moans of the trainees were so loud it was hard to hear anything, and then one voice began to echo through the night. One voice raised in song. The song was terribly out of tune, but sung with great enthusiasm. One voice became 2, and 2 became 3, and before long, everyone in the class was singing. And they knew that if one man could rise above the misery, that others could as well. The instructors threatened us with more time in the mud if we kept singing, but the singing persisted. And somehow the mud seemed a little warmer, and the wind a little tamer, and the dawn not so far away. So if you want to change the world, start singing when you're up to your neck in mud. So it's like that story that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, like you were talking about. The mud that was going to consume these guys, obviously, was the flames from the fiery furnace that they were going to be put into if they didn't worship this golden idol and these other gods. And one thing that I thought that was interesting and that I liked in that chapter was just the fact that when they addressed Nebuchadnezzar and they told him, no, it doesn't matter, you can put us in this fire first, we don't care. We know that our God can save us, and even if he doesn't, it doesn't matter. It had all their names at the same time. Either said they, or it listed every name together, that all these people, like in unison, they all said it together. It wasn't one person, and then the other just kind of, followed behind and was like, yeah, what he said. They were all in unison, and they were all together. So that was their song with great enthusiasm, telling him no. And because of their faith, obviously they weren't swallowed up, and Nebuchadnezzar was so overwhelmed, like, oh my gosh, your God is so great now, that he literally ended up changing him to the fact where he stated that if any person comes against the God of these guys, that they're going to be cut into small pieces. They're really going to be killed. And so it talks about that voice became 2, and 2 became 3, and before long everyone was singing. Because of these people's faith, you got everybody to sing. So a lot of times when we're in those situations where we're going through something and it's at the worst point, where you feel like, I don't understand, I've got this going on in my life, it just continues to get worse and worse and worse to the point where you feel like you can't take it anymore, you want to scream or you just want to leave. That is the time where the devil knows that you're about to win this battle. And that he's trying to do everything in his last-ditch effort to try to get you off the course. Because what happened? I can imagine how these guys felt before getting put into this furnace. And because of that last moment, that fire, right, that last test of that obstacle, they stood strong, and it resulted in changing the minds of others. And they even got promoted as well. So they got through. It was their last moment of being tested before they got through the fire. And they were exalted, and they were promoted. So just remember during that time where you're going through situations and it's at the worst point where you feel like you cannot continue, you have got to continue because you are almost there. You're almost out of that fiery furnace, and you're promoted and you're exalted. So finally, In SEAL training, there's a bell. A brass bell that hangs in the center of the compound for all the students to see. And all you have to do to quit is ring the bell. Ring the bell and you no longer have to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning. Ring the bell and you no longer have to do the freezing cold swims. Ring the bell and you no longer have to do the runs, the obstacle course, the PT, and you no longer have to endure the hardships of training. Just ring the bell. So number 10, if you want to change the world, don't ever, ever ring the bell. Amen. So we know for us spiritually, don't ever stop doing what God's asked you to do and throughout your entire walk. I mean, we've seen people that have backslid. I don't consider those people that have rang the bell. They're inching towards the bell, but they haven't got there yet. Hopefully that they turn around and get back on the track. But don't be like, people their spirits get low, and they get tempted, they get discouraged for many different reasons. Maybe it's because of other people, like talk about other churches have discouraged those people. It's kind of messed them up. But we can't ever turn from God's will for whatever reason. We can't use any of our excuses in our life. We can't use, I got my routine, I got my schedule. I don't want to give up my Sundays. I don't want to give up my Tuesdays. I don't want to give up this for this Bible study. Whatever God has told you to do, do it. Because if you don't, you will think for that moment, I'm going to go back to my original life and I'm going to do what I want to do. And you're going to realize that life that you go back to is going to be so much worse than the life that you would have had, or that God has beaten you up now, saying, you want that life, this is what you're going to have to go through. You want this life, this is what it could be. And you're going to have that moment where you're going to have to choose. You get beat down, and then, like I said, you have a choice. God shows you, he tries to, chasten you and say, hey, you need to go over here. But at some point, you have that choice. You can continue to keep going that way and say, I don't want it, I wanted my own life, or you can go his way. So we just continue to keep going God's way. So that's all I have. I just feel like the way it kind of worked out today was interesting with everything everybody said. It was a good recap. But just, we said this before, if you guys got anything from anybody here, God puts anything in your heart, you give offering. Obviously, you use your home church, you tithe. So thank you guys.